The cuffs clicked shut around my wrists before the coffee even stopped pouring. The sound was louder than it should have been, a metallic snap that silenced the diner. Even the coffee pot froze mid-pour, steam curling like a question mark over the counter. Someone whispered, "What did she do?" Nobody answered. The deputies had come in quiet, but there's no such thing as a quiet arrest. Their boots left puddles on the checkered floor, rain still dripping from their cuffs. I didn't resist. Resistance only feeds small men their authority. The smell of bacon grease and detergent clung to my sleeves. The cuffs bit into my skin, cold, familiar, almost nostalgic. I'd worn heavier metal before. At the far end of the counter, my father stirred his coffee. One slow circle, then another, the spoon clinking like a clock counting down. He didn't stand. He didn't ask why. He just smiled. The kind of smile that grows best in someone else's humiliation. "Told you," he said finally, voice carrying over the silence. "Always said she'd end up in handcuffs." A couple of regulars laughed under their breath. One man looked away, pretending to study his toast. The deputy read something from a printout. Wrong name, wrong context, but the right amount of power in his tone. "Suspect matches the description of an armed fugitive seen near the naval yard." The words hung there. Armed. Fugitive. I could have spoken, could have fixed everything in one sentence. But years of conditioning screamed louder. Say nothing. Silence was survival. Silence was service. My father leaned back on his stool, pleased with himself. He'd worn that same expression when I'd come home from boot camp, bruised and proud. He'd said then, "Didn't last a year, did you?" He'd been wrong. He just never found out. The deputies led me past him, my reflection caught in the chrome napkin dispenser. Apron stained, wrists bound, head high. It looked like defeat. It wasn't. He watched me go, eyes glinting with something colder than victory. Then, for a fraction of a second, only long enough to notice, the mask slipped. His jaw trembled. His gaze faltered as if he'd seen a ghost instead of a failure. The deputies pushed open the door, rain hissing against the awning. Then came the crackle of a police radio. "Unit 9, hold your position. Admiral Hayes en route for verification. Repeat, Admiral Hayes inbound." A black sedan rolled to a stop outside. The windows dripped with rain, the license plates clean. Official. Hayes hadn't come by chance. He'd been at the Norfolk Naval Base that morning, reviewing port security logs when the arrest file hit his desk. My name, red flagged, no record attached. He knew what that meant. He came himself. The doors opened, and he stepped inside, dress whites gleaming even under the flickering diner lights. His presence pulled every eye in the room like gravity. He scanned the space once, then saw me. His stride stopped dead. The color drained from his face, then returned with recognition. Not fear, but respect. Rain dripped from my hair onto my forearm. The sleeve of my shirt had ridden up, exposing ink the color of old storms. A trident crossing an anchor, wrapped in a band of coordinates. The Admiral's breath caught. When he spoke, his tone turned the room colder than the rain outside. "Who authorized this arrest?" No one answered. "Release her," he said. "But, sir—" "Now!" The cuffs opened with a metallic sigh. They hit the floor and rolled once before stopping at my father's boot. He didn't move. His hand trembled on the coffee mug, the ripples breaking the reflection of the ceiling light. A small, fragile quake in a man who never shook. The Admiral turned to him. "You might want to stand, Mr. Carter." A pause. Then, "You're in the presence of one of ours." My father's mouth opened. A sound rose, broke, and died. I didn't look at him. I just rubbed my wrists, the red marks bright under the fluorescent glow. Silence had always been my weapon. Today, it was also my victory. The Admiral's voice was still echoing when I saw my father lower his eyes. Not from guilt, but confusion. For him, that moment was disbelief. For me, it was memory, because long before the cuffs, long before the ink, there was a house that smelled of gun oil and resentment. That's where the war really started. Some battles begin long before you learn to aim. When I was 8, my father threw my report card into the fireplace. "B's aren't achievements," he said, sipping beer like it was penance. "They're proof you could have done better." The paper curled, blackened, turned to ash. The living room filled with the smell of ink burning. I didn't cry. Crying was another failure in his book. My mother stood behind him, her hand gripping the back of a chair hard enough to whiten her knuckles. "She's trying," she said softly. He didn't look at her. Trying is for people who don't win. That was the rhythm of our house. His words, her silence, my effort evaporating in between. By 13, I'd learned how to time my movements around his moods, how to tell from the sound of his boots whether he was sober or not. I cleaned my room like it was a bunker. I held my breath during dinner. When he left the Marines, the medals came home before his pride did. He spent days polishing them, lining them up on the mantle like proof he'd once been someone. He'd look at me and mutter, "You'll never understand what real discipline looks like." He wasn't wrong. Not then. I didn't understand that discipline wasn't shouting. It was endurance. When I turned 18, I enlisted. He laughed. Not the amused kind, the kind that cuts. "You won't last a month," he said. "You don't have what it takes to bleed and smile about it." I lasted 6 years. What he didn't know, what no one knew, was that somewhere between the drills and the gun oil, I caught the eye of a man named Hayes. A commander then, not yet an admiral. He saw what my father never did. I didn't need to be told what to do. I just needed a war worth fighting. He pulled me aside after a marksmanship exercise. "You ever consider the quiet units?" "I thought quiet meant boring, sir." He smiled. "Not the kind I'm talking about." 2 months later, my records disappeared. I didn't ask why, I just followed orders. They taught us to vanish, to hold breath underwater until the lungs screamed, to stay still in heat that could melt a rifle scope, to fire once and forget the sound. There were only 6 of us who graduated that cycle. 5 men, 1 ghost with a braid and a secret. I became what my father swore I couldn't. A SEAL sniper operating under clearance so black it didn't technically exist. No rank, no name, just precision. Then came the mission. Somalia, 2019. We were told to extract a convoy pinned down by insurgents. The rain turned the desert to glass. Every shot sounded like thunder cracking a bone. When it ended, 2 men didn't come back. I watched the body bags zip shut and felt something inside me do the same. That night, I took out a letter I'd been carrying for months. The last one my mother ever wrote. The paper was soft from being unfolded too many times. She'd died while I was deployed, a heart attack in the garden. The letter was never meant for me. It had been left unfinished on the kitchen table. "Don't let him tell you who you are." That was the last line. No signature, no goodbye, just that. I read it over and over until the words blurred. Then I folded it into my journal beside a photograph. Her, in the backyard, laughing while sunlight caught her hair. That's the image I carried when everything else went dark. Years later, when the mission in Norfolk fell apart and I found myself staring at the inside of a holding cell, I remembered her handwriting. The ink had bled through the page, like it wanted to cross time to reach me. The sheriff, Dalton, his badge tarnished and his smile mean, tapped the bars with a pen. "Funny," he said. "You don't look dangerous." I didn't answer. He leaned closer. "You one of those wannabe soldiers, dress up for attention?" Silence. He didn't like silence. Men like him never do. "You know," he said, "your old man called. Said to make sure you learn something from this." That was the moment I realized humiliation was an old language, one I'd learned fluently from childhood. I sat on the narrow bench tracing the trident tattoo through the sleeve of my shirt. Each line etched in ink felt like a promise. We'd earned them in blood, not ink. When the door finally opened, the sound echoed through the cell like a gunshot. A new voice spoke, calm, clean, carrying authority the room couldn't contain. "Lieutenant Carter," Admiral Hayes said, stepping inside, "you held your silence. That's more than most." He dismissed Dalton with a glance, then he turned to me. "Let's get you out of here." I stood, cuffs clinking. "Sir, I followed protocol." He nodded. "I know, but this time protocol failed you." As we walked past the sheriff, his smirk had vanished. Outside, sunlight hit the bars of the holding room just right, turning them from confinement into something that looked almost like ribs of light. I looked down at my arm, the tattoo half hidden under my sleeve. For years, I'd been called a failure, a disgrace, a dropout. But she was right. My mother. He never got to tell me who I was. Silence isn't surrender. It's the discipline of power. The rain had stopped by the time they drove me to the station, the kind of gray Virginia morning that can't decide between storm and peace. The car windows blurred, and the city slid by in streaks of water and neon. I watched the reflection of my own face, half shadow, half soldier, and thought how strange it felt to be restrained by men who had no idea who they were touching. Inside, the holding room hummed under flickering light. The cuffs were gone, but the ache around my wrists pulsed like memory. Through the window, I could see my father and Sheriff Dalton at the desk. Two men who wore arrogance like a uniform. Dalton's laugh was oily, practiced. My father's was familiar, forged from habit, not humor. I'd seen that same smile when he told me I wasn't marine material, when he called me a failure for leaving home, when he said, "You'll come crawling back, just like your mother did." But now he stood smaller, his body folded around something I couldn't yet name. Then came the voice that shifted the air. "Where is she?" Admiral Hayes. Even muffled, the tone made walls straighten. Dalton's hand hovered near his belt. Old instincts, bad ones. "Sir, this is a local matter." Hayes entered before the sentence could finish, rain still beaded on his uniform. His eyes scanned the room, stopping on me. "Lieutenant," he said, and everything inside me aligned. I stood. "Sir." He looked down at my wrists, red where the metal had bitten. His jaw tightened. "You didn't identify yourself." "No, sir." "Good. I wouldn't have either." Dalton stepped forward, puffed chest. "We acted on a valid ID, Admiral. She fits the suspect description." Hayes' voice sharpened. "You arrested a member of my command without verification?" Dalton blinked. "Command?" Hayes turned to him fully, the ribbons on his chest catching the light. "Lieutenant Carter, SEAL-trained sniper, Class Redwater, 2015, 3 covert deployments. You want her record? It's higher clearance than your entire department." Silence. My father's breath caught. He looked from Hayes to me, his eyes flicking between the metals, and the girl he'd once told couldn't even scrub a rifle clean. "Aye," he started, but no sound followed. Hayes looked at me, then at him. "You raised her?" My father nodded, throat dry. "Tried to." "Then you must have done something right. She's one of the best I've seen." Something cracked behind my ribs. Not relief, something sharper, the sound of two truths colliding. Because I could see it then. The two men standing before me weren't just authority figures. They were my past and my present, colliding in a room too small to contain both. One had built his power on cruelty, the other built mine on trust. And I stood between them, unarmed but not powerless. Hayes turned back to Dalton. "You'll clear her name and issue a correction. Now." Dalton muttered compliance and vanished down the hall. Hayes faced me again. "You want to file a formal report, Lieutenant?" I looked at my father, his hands trembling, eyes wide and wet, the first honest emotion I'd seen in him since childhood. "No, sir," I said. "He's already served his sentence." Hayes studied me for a long moment, then nodded. "As you were." He turned to leave, but I stepped forward and held out my hand. "Thank you, sir." He paused, a flicker of surprise, then respect. He clasped my hand firmly, the kind of handshake between equals, not ranks. "You did the right thing, Lena. The quiet thing." When he walked out, the air thinned. I looked back at my father. He was sitting now, shoulders caved, staring at the scuffed floor. "They said you dropped out," he murmured. "You believed them." I didn't know what else to believe. For the first time, there was no venom in his tone, just fatigue, the kind that comes from running from the truth for too long. I reached for my jacket. "You always said silence was weakness," I told him quietly. "Turns out it's stronger than pride." He nodded once, a small, broken acknowledgement. I walked past him toward the door. Outside, the storm had ended. The light was strange, that rare, post-rain clarity where every color feels reborn. Hayes was waiting beside the sedan, the air cool and sharp. He looked at me, then at the faint sunlight breaking through the clouds. "Ready, Lieutenant?" "Yes, sir." He nodded toward the sky. "Looks like the rain's done its job." I looked back one last time. Through the glass, my father sat still, the reflection of sunlight splitting his image across the window. For once, he wasn't the man casting the shadow. He was standing inside it. I turned away. The puddles reflected the sky now, clean and bright. My boots left clear prints in the water, proof that I was still here, still walking forward. The past didn't chase me anymore. It just watched me leave. After the storm breaks, you don't rebuild right away. You stand still to see what's left standing inside you. The next morning, the sky over Norfolk looked scrubbed clean, as if the night rain had washed the world back to zero. The diner reopened. Same chrome counter, same stale coffee. But something in the air had changed. Or maybe it was just me. They'd offered me a night on base, a warm bed, and silence. I didn't take it. I came back to work instead. Not because I needed the job, because I needed to look at that place again, stripped of its ghosts. When I pushed through the door, heads turned, then quickly pretended not to. The regulars had read the correction in the morning paper. Mistaken identity, civilian released. No mention of the trident. No mention of Hayes. That part would stay classified. Right where I'd lived all these years, in silence. I tied the apron around my waist. The smell of bacon grease hit like deja vu. Same shift, same cracked tile, different weight in my chest. Sheriff Dalton didn't show his face again. But my father did. He sat at his usual stool, coffee already half gone, ring tapping against the cup in that same slow rhythm. He didn't look up when I poured him a refill. Didn't speak either. That was fine. Words had always been his weapon. Silence was mine. I wiped the counter beside him, my hands steady now. The clock above the register ticked the same, but the sound no longer stung. Finally, he said, "You went back to work." "I like it here," I said. "You don't have to." "I know." He stared into the cup like it might answer something for him. "I don't sleep much lately." "Try harder," I said, and kept wiping. He almost smiled. Almost. Then softer. "You were good yesterday." "That's my job," I said. "I didn't mean the waitress part." I didn't answer. That was enough. When he left, he did something he'd never done before. Left money on the counter, more than the bill, folded once. Under it, a small scrap of paper, the kind he used to write notes on when he still had a command post. All it said was, "Proud." No signature. Just the word, shaky and crooked, but real. I stood there for a long time before picking it up. It felt heavier than any medal I'd ever earned. That night, I sat by the window in my small apartment. The folded note lay beside a letter I hadn't touched in years, my mother's, the unfinished one. I unfolded it again. The paper was thin now, the edges soft. I'd memorized every stroke of her handwriting. "Don't let him tell you who you are." That was all, but it felt complete now somehow. Outside, the rain started again, soft, rhythmic. I opened the window. The air smelled like the sea. In the reflection of the glass, the tattoo on my arm caught the streetlight, the trident and anchor gleaming faintly like a promise kept. I thought of Admiral Hayes, of how he'd looked at me in that holding room, not as a subordinate, as an equal, as proof that silence, when chosen, can be a kind of strength. And I thought of my father, of how, for the first time, he hadn't looked at me with contempt, but with confusion, maybe even awe. It wasn't forgiveness yet, but it was the start of something close. I picked up my pen and wrote a new line beneath my mother's unfinished one. "I won't let him tell me who he is either." Then I folded it neatly, slid it back into the envelope, and tucked it under the folded seal flag in the drawer. Tomorrow, Hayes wanted me back at the base for debrief. Another mission, another silence to keep. But tonight, there was only quiet, the kind that didn't feel like hiding anymore. The storm had passed, the air was clear, and for once, I wasn't just surviving, I was steady. Forgiveness isn't surrender. It's the final act of command. The cemetery rested on a bluff that looked out over the Atlantic, the kind of place built for both endings and perspective. The morning air was heavy with salt. The wind came in steady gusts from the sea, bending the long grass until it whispered like static. I parked at the edge of the gravel road, the tires crunching to a stop beside the old iron gate. The sound echoed, hollow against the stone. In the back seat, the folded seal flag waited, edges crisp, corners perfect. Protocol said to store it in a trunk. Something older said to bring it home. The hill sloped upward, the path muddy from last night's rain. My boots left deep tracks as I climbed, the smell of wet earth rising with every step. When I reached her grave, the sun was still low enough to cast the world in pale blue. Margaret Carter, 1964-2014. The letters were beginning to fade, carved shallow by someone who didn't know how permanent grief could be. No scripture, no words of comfort. Just her name, and a single rose etched beneath it. I knelt, brushing leaves and rainwater from the surface. The marble was cold under my fingers. For a long time, I said nothing. The quiet here wasn't empty. It was alive, full of the small sounds that cities forget, the rustle of grass, the slow heartbeat of the sea, the sigh of wind against stone. When I was 10, she used to bring me here after church. She'd pack 2 apples, a thermos of coffee for him and 1 of cocoa for me. We'd sit on the stone wall and watch the ships in the distance. She'd always ask the same question. "What do you think they're carrying, Lena?" I'd guess something childish. Treasure, toys, fireworks. She'd smile and say, "Maybe, or maybe just people trying to get somewhere safer." I didn't understand that she wasn't talking about the ships. Now standing here, I could still hear her voice, soft, deliberate, with that little catch at the end when she was trying not to cry. It was the same voice that used to whisper behind closed doors when he raised his. Don't let his noise become your language. It had taken me years to learn that silence wasn't weakness. It was defiance, disguised as grace. I traced the carved rose with my thumb. I made it, Mom, I whispered, even when I wasn't supposed to. The wind carried my words out to sea. Behind me, gravel shifted. The rhythm of the steps was unmistakable, heavy, uneven, carrying the weight of things unsaid. I didn't turn. Didn't think I'd find you here, my father said. His voice used to cut. Today, it sounded smaller, like it had worn itself down to something human. I didn't think you'd come, I said. I almost didn't. He stopped a few paces back, breathing hard. The years had narrowed him. The shoulders that once filled a doorway now seemed uncertain of their width. He stood beside me in silence for a while. The wind tangled the cuffs of his coat. His reflection wavered in the wet marble like a ghost that hadn't decided whether to stay. Finally, he spoke. I brought this. I turned. He held out an envelope, small, worn soft, edges folded and refolded until the paper almost sighed. Your mother's letter, he said. I kept it. Thought she was writing to me. A pause. Guess I was wrong. I took it carefully. My fingers brushed his, the contact brief, accidental. His hand was cold. Why bring it now? I asked. He rubbed his thumb along the edge. Because I saw something yesterday that doesn't leave easy. You standing there, him saluting you. He shook his head. I didn't know whether to be proud or ashamed that I didn't know who you'd become. The honesty caught me off guard. He had never once said the word ashamed without directing it at me. You never asked, I said. I didn't want to hear the answer. He crouched slowly by the headstone, his knees popping as he went down. I told her once you'd never make it, that you'd fall apart. He swallowed hard. She told me I'd already done the breaking for you. The wind picked up then, swirling through the cemetery, tugging at my jacket. He looked up, eyes red but clear. She was right. For a moment, I didn't see the man who'd mocked me at that diner. I saw the Marine who'd lost the war with himself. I spent half my life trying to teach you discipline, he said. Turns out I didn't even understand what it was. I crouched beside him, matching his height. Discipline isn't shouting, it's showing up. He blinked. And forgiveness? Same thing. He huffed a small, shaky laugh. Didn't think I'd get a sermon from you. I didn't think you'd listen. Silence stretched again. The good kind, the kind that holds room for both grief and grace. He reached for the flag under my arm. She'd have liked to see you fold that yourself. She would have told me to iron it first. He smiled, faint but real. Yeah, she would. I handed him one corner of the flag. Help me lay it down. We unfolded it together, careful, deliberate, the red, white, and blue stretching between us like truce colors. When we placed it at the base of the stone, the wind caught the edge and lifted it gently, as if the air itself wanted to salute. For a long time, neither of us spoke. The waves below broke and reformed, endless as regret. He finally said, You were good yesterday. That's my job. I didn't mean the job. I looked at him. Then what? The way you stood. Calm, like your mother. That hit deeper than praise ever could. He hesitated, then reached into his coat pocket and pulled out a small, folded note, the same one he'd left on the counter. Still yours, he said, voice rough. I don't need it back. I took it, glanced at the single word. Proud. He nodded toward it. Didn't know how to say it out loud. You just did, I said. He looked down at the ground, shoulders shaking once, a short exhale that wasn't quite a sob. I've got a lot to learn, don't I? You're finally in the right class, I said softly. The sunlight broke through then, clean, blinding, unstoppable. It fell across the stone, across the flag, across us. I looked down at my forearm. The trident and anchor gleamed in gold light, edges catching like fire. I used to think this meant survival, I said. What does it mean now? Direction. He stood slowly, joints stiff but movements careful. I don't deserve to walk beside you, he said. No, I said, but you can still walk forward. He met my eyes, really met them this time, and nodded. Permission to try? Granted. He laughed, quiet, the kind that sounds like relief. You always did outrank me. The wind rose again, carrying gulls overhead. They cut across the sunlight, their shadows rippling over the graves like fleeting blessings. I stepped back, giving him space to stand with her, his hand resting on the stone, his head bowed. I turned toward the hill. The sea shimmered beyond, alive with motion. Each gust of wind smelled of salt, of rust, of endings that weren't really endings. I looked over my shoulder one last time. He was still there, small, solitary, but upright. Not the man who'd mocked me, not the tyrant of my youth. Just a father trying to remember how to be human again. For the first time, I didn't hate him for it. The wind pressed against my back as I walked. The grass bowed with it, the world breathing in rhythm. When I reached the gate, I stopped and looked up. The sunlight had fully claimed the sky now, blue so wide it felt merciful. I closed my eyes and heard her voice again, faint, steady, woven with the sea. Don't let his noise become your language. I smiled. I won't, Mom. The flag behind me rippled once, catching the last gust before settling, and I walked down the hill, boots steady in the mud, the ocean's pulse following me all the way home. The sea doesn't forgive, it accepts. So does love, when you finally stop fighting it. Some wounds don't heal by closing. They heal by staying open long enough to let the light in. 3 days later, the sea was calm again. The pier outside Naval Base Norfolk shimmered under the noon sun, gulls suspended above the water like punctuation marks between sky and tide. The ocean never looked still up close. It only pretended to be. I stood on the edge of the dock in my uniform, sleeves rolled up, wind pressing the fabric against my skin. The trident and anchor tattoo glimmered faintly under the sun. It didn't look like a scar anymore. It looked like belonging. Hayes waited near the end of the pier, reading from a clipboard, glasses low on his nose. When he saw me, he tucked the papers under his arm. "Carter," he said. "You're early." "Old habits, sir." "The good kind." He gestured toward the ship moored nearby. Gray hull, deck lined with sailors in preparation. "You'll be out for 6 months. Surveillance, no direct contact. Think you can manage the quiet?" "I've lived there my whole life," I said. He smiled faintly. "You did well, not just in that diner, but after. Most people don't walk back into a place that humiliated them." "Most people didn't grow up with Robert Carter," I said. That made him chuckle once, soft and genuine. "Fair point." He handed me an envelope, orders, sealed. But there was another note folded beneath it, his handwriting sharp and deliberate. It read, "Command isn't about volume. It's about knowing when silence says enough." I folded it carefully and slipped it into my pocket. "Thank you, sir." He nodded once. "Dismissed, Lieutenant. And Carter?" "Yes, sir." "Your father called the base this morning, asked for your mailing address. Didn't sound drunk." I didn't answer. Didn't need to. Hayes simply smiled and walked away. The dock stretched out like a narrow bridge between past and purpose. I watched the reflection of sunlight scatter across the waves, hundreds of tiny stars rising and vanishing. For a moment, I closed my eyes and let the sound of the water fill me. Every crash and retreat felt like breathing, the world exhaling and taking me with it. I thought of the cemetery, the way his hand had trembled when he touched her name. I thought of her humming in the garden, the way she'd stop mid-song when I'd ask her why she smiled so much, and of her answer, half laughing, half sad. Because sometimes joy has to be an act of defiance. She'd been right. I had carried that defiance all the way to the front line and back. In the barracks later that night, I unpacked my duffel. The small photo of her went on the shelf, beside the folded flag and the new letter from my father, unopened for now. I didn't need to read it to know what it said. The ship's horn sounded in the distance, low and steady, calling the next cycle of departure. I sat at my desk and wrote in my journal. Not a report, not a mission log, just the truth in plain ink. He no longer frightens me. Underneath it, I added, the storm wasn't his to calm, it was mine to outlast. I stared at the page for a while, then tore it out and tucked it between my mother's unfinished letter and Hayes's note. 3 voices, 3 languages of strength. I turned off the light. Through the window, the harbor lights blinked in slow rhythm, Morse code written by waves. I knew what it said without reading it. You are seen. You are steady. You are home. The room filled with silence, not the kind that hides, but the kind that listens. For the first time, I didn't need words, medals, or permission. I'd already been saluted once. The rest of the world could stay seated. Morning came soft and gold. The ship pulled away from the dock, the wake unfurling behind like a long white ribbon. The sea opened in front of us, clean, endless, waiting. I stood on the deck, watching the coastline shrink until it looked like memory. The salt wind lifted my hair, carrying the last echo of my mother's voice through it. "Don't let his noise become your language." I smiled. It never would again. The horizon stretched wide and merciful. The sky, the water, the air, all one color of freedom. Somewhere far behind, on a hill above the ocean, a man stood at a grave, trying to remember how to begin again. And somewhere ahead, another mission waited. Quieter, maybe, but no less important. Because honor wasn't the uniform, or the rank, or the salute. It was the choice to stand still in the storm and not let bitterness dictate the weather. I gripped the rail, steady, eyes forward. The sun broke through the clouds, scattering gold across the waves. Some wounds are invisible until honor brings them to light. They mocked her for being just a waitress. They forgot grace under fire is its own kind of strength. Some wounds don't show on the skin. They live in silence, in patience, in the moments you choose, dignity over rage. And sometimes the loudest victory is the one that doesn't need applause. If you believe strength means standing tall, even when the world or your own family tries to cut you down, then join us. Subscribe to channel for more stories of courage, dignity, and truth.